In this video, we will learn how to configure Mercusys MW305R router. Mercusys MW305R router, 300 Mbps wireless and router. So I would say here in our country, one of the popular routers that are deployed on the client side or the end user side, usually for small office, home office environment. So you could access the details on this website, mercusys.com. So this is the look or the appearance of your Mercusys MW305R. There are other variants, of course. So this model comes with three 5 dBi antennas, so basically sufficient enough to cover small area or usually a home setup environment. So we'll see the specifications, so we will know more details about this device, this product. So wireless standards, so you have NGB, so there is no AC for this model. So as you could see, frequency is 2.4 gigahertz, so there is no 5 gigahertz, so meaning to say this is not a dual band wireless router. So the speed is up to 300 Mbps. Of course, it depends on the environment, interference, so on and so forth. So you have the reception sensitivity. So you have transmission power, wireless security. So your Wi-Fi could have a pre-shared key, WPA and WPA2. So this device could also function as a WDS bridge. So it's WAN or wide area networking port. So there is only one port in this device. So it could be dynamic IP or a static IP, but it could be one of those tunnels. For example, today's popular connection type is PPPoE. So there are 3 LAN ports for this model. So other features, of course, it could provide DHCP server services. It could do port forwarding via virtual server or DMZ. So there is dynamic DNS support, DYDNS and no IP. So IPv4, there is no IPv6. There is a guest network for your wireless, 2.4 gigahertz. So for power purposes, you have 5 volts, 6 amperes. We already mentioned that there are 3 5 dBi fixed omnidirectional antennas, so 360 to cover your area. So basically this is the specifications of our Mercusys MW305R. It could also do some parental control, access control, and it could be remotely managed as well as, of course, locally managed. Okay, so I have the MW305R powered on. My computer, or this computer, is connected to one of its LAN ports. So basically my networking adapter is obtaining or wanted to acquire an IP address from the Mercusys MW305R router. So the default IP of this device is 192.168.1.1, and it could be accessed via a browser. So let us try 192.168.1.1. Press enter. So the very first time when we set up the device, we need to supply, or it goes through a wizard, as you would say, wherein we will need to supply some settings in order for our Mercusys router to be working. Alright, so we'll set up the password. So for our password, let's have capital P @ or small letter A, change my mind, $$ W0RD. So you have a strong password. So capital P A $$ W0RD. So that password matches. So never. Okay, so for our network, we'll have for this time we'll have the dynamic IP. So this Mercusys WAN Port will try to acquire an IP from an upstream router or telco router or ISP router. So for our wireless, so you have let's just do some basic changes only. So Mercusys Wi-Fi. So password, let's just use for now the same password that we have, although obviously it's not ideal, so this is only for demonstration purposes. Okay, so click to finish. So obviously you have a few steps to finish. We have new password. It asks us on whether our WAN port is static, dynamic, or PPPoE. We have chosen dynamic IP, and we name our wireless adapter SSID to Mercusys _Wi-Fi, and you have the pre-shared key, which is the same password. So once we click finish, so we have initially configured our Mercusys device. So one thing to check is, let's connect our network. Alright, so our WAN port haven't acquired any IP. So we have obviously a message here, WAN port is disconnected. So there is no cable, or the cable is not connected to our device. So let's connect it now. So I purposely didn't connect so that you will see in action. So you have seen that the WAN port is disconnected, status is gone, and from all zeros, our WAN IP acquired an IP address, so 192.168.88.254. So perhaps the upstream router is a MikroTik device. Okay, now that we are able to acquire an IP, so before we proceed, perhaps it might be a good idea to test whether we can go to the internet, or we can reach internet sites with this IP. So it doesn't mean we have an IP is automatic, so it's better to test. So Mercusys thankfully has a utility which check for that. So we can go advanced, can go to system tools. So below we have diagnostic tools. So we have ping or tracer. So use ping. So we have IPv4 address and domain name. So of course, common diagnostic check is ping to a valid public IP. So in this case, it's Google DNS. So let's click start. And yes, we're able to receive a reply from 8.8.8. So let's test the DNS. So www.google.com. So make sure it's a valid DNS name. So click start, and yes. So how about different sites? So let's say facebook.com. So start, and yes, there's a bit of request timeout. So let's check, and yes. So we are able to test that from our Mercusys router, we are able to reach not only IP address but as well as domain names. At this point, we will check the rest of the configuration parts or settings that we can do on this MW305R. So perhaps we can go to network. So we have one settings. So if you want to change, this is the connection type changes. So you have LAN settings. So you can actually do a manual and change the default 192.168.1.1 and the subnet mask. So we will not do that for now. So IPTV, you have different options here. So MAC address settings, so use the MAC address of this router, or even you can manually set. So DHCP server is by default on. So if you have a DHCP server on the network, perhaps a server, then it might be a good idea to turn off this particular setting. So by default it has a range of 192.168.1.100 to 199 with a least time of 120 or 120 minutes. So there is no gateway and there is no primary DNS set, so it might be a good idea for you to set that. So let's say if you have a preferred DNS, so it might be Google, it might be a different DNS server, perhaps you have your own DNS server in your environment, then you put it here appropriately. So it could be a public DNS, it could be also a private DNS. So DHCP equipment, so currently this is leased out. So IP MAC binding, so what is on the what we call this IP address is tied up to this MAC address as it was leased out. So you have 100, as you will see on the DHCP server, it starts with 100, so the 100 is already leased out. So that's about it mostly on things that you need to change on your network. Next, we can go to the wireless menu. So wireless, you have host network, guest network, and if you want to configure it to be a WDS bridge. So just a quick meaning on if you will enable WDS, so the router can bridge with another router. So if you have a root router to extend its wireless network. So in this demo, we might not do that. So we just go back to host network. So this is the main wireless network. So you have the service set identifier, Mercusys Wi-Fi, which we have configured when we do the wizard, setup wizard, we can enable or disable the broadcasting of SSID. So we can uncheck or check. This is our password. We can opt to make it open, which obviously is not advisable. You have some channels here, channel 1 to channel 13. So we don't have some country settings here. So mode, so you have the choices of the wireless standards that you can select, and BGN. So obviously the safest one is BGN for providing backward compatibility. So channel width, so you don't have much of options here. So you don't have 10 or other custom channel width, so you have 20 megahertz. So transmit power is you can adjust, so high, middle, or low. So if you want to confine it with a smaller area, you might lower the transmit power. So you have a small little box here which is AP isolation. So it means that your clients that are connected to this wireless would still be able to go to the internet. However, they are isolated or being prevented from communicating to the other wireless clients. So if you have some requirements that needs to be this kind of setup, okay, so they can go to the internet but they are not allowed to interact or communicate or reach their own respective IP addresses under the wireless network. So you might check the AP isolation. So for now, so we don't change any, as long as you know the setting is available. Next, we will see what are the things that we can do under network control. So under network control, you have parental controls and access control. So parental controls, so there's a little help here. So with parental controls, you can restrict internet access time for devices under control. So first you need to add the parental devices, so from a list, and select the effective time. So basically what it does is you add the device, for example your kids mobile phones, and you select the effective time wherein they are restricted and they will not be able to connect to the internet. So since time is important here, so your Mercusys should be having or correct time. So you need to go to system tools, so under time settings, so make sure the time zone is correct, make sure the date and time is appropriately set or correctly set in this manner. Let's assume that this is correct. So you can go back to network control, then there's a setting here to toggle off and on. So when you click on, so you cannot proceed because you need to add at least one parental device. So here there is a add button here, and you will select the appropriate device. Of course, if you have many devices there, you can add more. So click save. So please select the effective date, so you can slowly click or you can just hold and drag the appropriate time. So click save. So that is parental control. Next is access control. So access control, so let's check the little help here. So allows you to restrict access to a certain internet content for local devices. So you could either whitelist or blacklist a certain target or from a certain hosts. and obviously there is still schedule, so we can turn on. So by this time you can turn on the access control without adding some blacklist or whitelist here. So for this demo, so just do the blacklist. So let's say black Mercusys. Okay, so it's not ideal, so this is for just demonstration purposes. So let's say I block from these hosts. Okay, so mode IP address, so from this range 192.168 to 100. So you can add a new one. So let's, for example, from so controlled hosts, so from IP address or MAC address, so from 192.168.1.100 to 192.168, let's say 1.110. So click apply. So you now have the host part. So if you click save, so you'll have an error, incomplete rule, because you need to complete all the parameters. So you have description done, we have host under control done, so target, so there's some test here, so let's click add target. So let's say we are blocking Mercusys, and we have what we call the mode, so website, so Mercusys. Okay, so click OK and schedule, so anytime will do for this demonstration, and click save. Okay, so let's test if we can go to mercusys.com. so we're not able to go to this website. So however, if we delete this rule, okay, so delete, there's no save to confirm, so just be careful once you delete, and you can now access mercusys.com, so because we have removed it from our blacklist. So next we will check what's inside advanced users. So we have, as you can remember, these are some port forwarding settings. So you have virtual server, DMZ server, demilitarized zone, UPnP, universal plug and play settings, advanced routing, and dynamic DNS. Of course, we have time constraints, so we cannot really demo them all. So virtual server, basically we have some port forwarding scenario, so wherein you are listening to a certain external port, and it will be port forward to the internal port of a certain local area IP address, and you have a protocol. So let's say your port 8080, you'll be listening, so there's some default services already, for example DNS, you have HTTP. Okay, so there's telnet, so it will be, for example, translated to a different internal port, and you have your let's say you have a certain device that accepts this particular connection that is listening on port 8080. So let's say this is 200. Okay, so virtual server, so you can check the help, it will help for explanation. So DMZ, so you are exposing a certain IP address for the purposes of public facing, but normally you are doing it on purpose because that particular host is really meant to be exposed outside on a certain services. So you will click on and type in the host IP address. So universal plug and play settings. So there's a little help on what this UPnP feature. So it allows devices such as computers and internet appliances to automatically discover and communicate with each other on the local area network. So by default it's on. So this is what I like on this Mercusys router. It comes with a functionality wherein you can add static routes. So you can create, for example, if you have multiple hops or different routes to a certain destination or network, so you can add the destination address, the subnet mask, and the next hop IP. So pretty handy if you try to perform some static routing. So there's already some routing list or what's inside the routing table. So for dynamic DNS, of course, to remote this particular device via a dynamic domain name service. So you have the service provider no IP and DNS. So obviously you can register to those provider and key in the values. So finally we go to the last menu. Of course, second to the last menu, but the last menu is quick setup. So system tools. So local management. So you can restrict the managing of Mercusys to allow all or specific local devices. So if you want to improve your security and you have only a preferred IP, so you can select the allow specified local devices. So for remote management, by default it's disabled, so you can allow the remote device or allow all remote device or allow specified remote device. So for instance, if you select all allow all remote devices, so you can specify the port. So meaning to say, if I am coming from a different network other than 192.168.1.1, I just key in that particular IP, specifically the IP address or the DNS name, then port 8888. So that is the default port, but obviously you can try to change it. So this is very helpful for us to reach this particular router. So time settings, we have taken a look just now. So firmware upgrade is very important, so please check with Mercusys support for this particular model if there is a firmware version upgrade. So if there are important fixes for bugs or to improve stability on this router, it is recommended to upgrade. So far I personally don't have any issues so far for this particular firmware. However, it's recommended really to upgrade to any newer one or a stable version. So factory default restore, in the event you need to redo the settings, and you can perform a factory default restore. Of course, there is a reset pin on the hardware itself that you can press in order to reset it to a factory default. So like any networking device, after you have set up it's best practice, a better practice to back up the copy of your current settings and save it to a different location so that you can restore in the event that you need to put back the configuration. Okay, so although setting up Mercusys may not be that quite tedious, Okay, some few settings here and there, but it's good to have a handy backup. So reboot, if you want to perform a proper reboot. Okay, so change login. Of course, for time to time you might need to change the password. So device diagnostic tools, so we have seen this ping and tracer, and we have system logs to monitor what is being done on your system, and any other issues that will arise. You can check your system log. Okay, one more demo for you. So we will change our WAN settings. So instead, the connection type is dynamic IP. We will select PPPoE, point-to-point protocol over Ethernet. So you have some username and password here. So this is not your username or password during you log in your Mercusys to manage it. So this is the username and password provided by your service provider. So you have to check with them whether it's your telco or your local internet service provider. So in my case, I have a test PPPoE server. So I have a user, PPPoE user. So password is that one, and click save. So it won't connect because I need to change it to connect to the particular PPPoE server. So let me connect it to that one. Okay, so hopefully, okay, so it's connected. So you notice it carries a different IP now, 172.16.10.20, with the following DNS servers. Okay, so we are connected on our PPPoE connection. So again, as best practice, so we will check if we will be able to reach public IP addresses. So let's do the check again. So IP address. Okay, so there's a reply. What a different IP. There is a reply. So how about a name? So facebook.com. And yes, there is a reply. Let's check a different DNS name. And yes, there is a reply. So we have successfully transferred from a dynamic IP connection to a PPPoE connection. So that would end our demonstration for Mercusys MW305R router. So in this video, we gone through how to configure our Mercusys MW305R router. So from the factory default, there is no configuration yet. So we go through the setup wizard. So we set up our password, our WAN type connection, our wireless device. We did go through the wireless interfaces, wherein we can change the SSID, security or pre-shared key. Then we go to the controls, parental control and access control. We did go to the advanced users, wherein we have virtual server, DMZ, UPnP. Then we go through the system tools, wherein we see some important settings, time settings, access remotely, firmware upgrade, rebooting, changing some login password. So I hope you learn uh, from this video on how to configure Mercusys and be able to have some confidence to deploy this router to homes or small offices. So this video configuring Mercusys MW305R router.